much. Good morning, afternoon, and evening all. For those of you who don't know where Calgary is close to the west coast of Canada and in the province of Alberta. Calgary has about 1.3 million people within its region, and we're also home to many head offices, several universities, and colleges. Major tourist destinations include Banff, Canmore, Lake Louise, and the Calgary Stampede. We also hosted the 1988 Winter Olympics. Unique attributes include clean air, open spaces, a dry climate. We have parking policies that limit parking in the downtown and that drive transit use. And again, we have a high per capita income. This slide shows some quick facts about Calgary Transit. We're a multimodal system with bus and LRT systems as well as a paratransit system. Our ridership in 2014 was approximately 102 million trips. Calgary's economy has traditionally been tied to the oil and gas industry, and this number has dropped slightly with the economic condition in Calgary with low oil prices. We have approximately 1,200 buses and LRVs and 163 bus routes. Our LRT system comprises of 56 kilometers of track, and we have 44 LRT stations on the system. The image on the left is our system map, and the map to the right is our LRT map. Our downtown is located in the center of the city. Our LRT system has two main lines, the red line and the blue line, which converge downtown. In the downtown, both lines intersect along a transit-only corridor on 7th Avenue. In addition, we have 5 BRT routes, which are in red on the map on the left. Because of very little space in the downtown and the strategic parking policy, which limited the number of parking stalls downtown, the LRT became very popular. Today, 50% of all trips into the downtown core are done by transit. The next few slides give a sneak peek as to what we're currently building in Calgary. The implementation and construction are direct results of the Route Ahead strategy, which is Calgary's 30-year strategic plan, which we'll be speaking about further in the next few sections of the presentation. We heard from our customers during Route Ahead that they wanted better travel options to get across the city and did not necessarily want to go downtown to transfer. The lines on this map will make up Calgary's BRT network. They still integrate with the existing LRT network, and they'll provide direct connection to major land uses like hospitals, universities, and business parks. The North Crosstown BRT will be a new route connecting customers from Northeast Calgary on the top right of the screen to the University of Calgary and 2 hospitals on the bottom left of the screen. The route will operate in mixed traffic, however, we'll be installing transit priority measures such as queue jumps and bus priority signals at intersections to allow the bus to have advantages over cars and increase, back to the North Crosstown, which will allow priority signals and intersections to allow the bus to have advantages over cars and increase reliability of the route. The 16th Ave corridor, which is the long straight line at the bottom of the screen, is home to another post-secondary institution and many redevelopment opportunities. It's worth noting that there is a recent land use redevelopment along 16th Avenue in which transit service and stops from this new route were incorporated. Similar to the North Crosstown, the South Crosstown BRT will operate in mixed traffic with the exception of the portion that overlaps with the Southwest BRT project, which is highlighted on the red and yellow dash line on the map. The South Crosstown will be able to utilize the transitway to make its trip from Westbrook Station at the top left of the screen to Douglas. Westbrook Station is a current hub for LRT and is a TOD site. In Quarry Park at the other end of the line, there are several major large-scale office developments that'll be popping up, and we'll be able to use the new transit service. On 17th Avenue Southeast, the emphasis is on transit and all active modes. This project is about complete streets that will see improved walking and cycling facilities, as well as 2 median transit-only lanes. The project is tying downtown to future developments and communities east of Calgary. The last BRT project is the Southwest BRT. The project became controversial. Our public engagement sessions quickly became contentious, and sessions were canceled at that time. Public groups formed both for and against the project. This project is a new BRT route from communities in Southwest Calgary where transit connections are core to downtown. Along the route, there are stops at major recreational facilities, a hospital, several large commercial and business development centers, and a university. The key feature of this route, which ended up being a portion that was most debated, was the construction of 3 kilometers of 2 transit-only lanes along the west side of 14th Street. This is a rendering of what the transitway would look like. The transit lanes are on the west side of the corridor and would function similar to a train line. The last project that we're planning and designing is stage 1 of the Green Line. This includes 20 kilometers of track, 14 stations, 3 tunnels, and 4 kilometers of a tunnel which go under downtown. The portion that we're building today is most complex and which would allow us to extend into the future. We're expecting about 60 to 65 daily transit trips on this line and looking at linking 191,000 jobs. I'll hand that back over to Matthias now for the next section of the webinar.
Yes, thank you, Asif, for this impressive introduction. I think everybody already has seen that there's quite some potential for discussion, particularly with car drivers, and that means also with political decision makers. So before we get into how to deal with those stakeholders, we will start with section 1 that is rather linking to strategic questions. And the question here is how strategic mobility planning is embedded in local decision making, and what does that mean for the interaction with the political level and with implementation, or for the daily work of the administrative level. What does that mean? So Chris, I think that is addressed to you. Happy to hear your insights on that.
Thank you very much. The way that we embed mobility planning in our local decision making is through our strategic goal of linking land use and transportation. And I'll talk first about how we do that at a citywide level. Our 60-year land use and transportation master plans, what we call the Calgary Transportation Plan and Municipal Development Plan, are based on intensifying land use around nodes and corridors throughout Calgary. We began to program our transportation investments based on these land use goals. We also invested money in developing land, city-owned land, within a short walk of transit stations. And we constructed a number of complete street projects, projects that incorporate cycling and walking as the priority modes of travel rather than the automobile. Linking land use and mobility is a means of obtaining administrative and political support. As part of our plan development, we ask questions like, where do we grow from here as a city? How do we accommodate an additional 1.3 million people, a doubling of the size of Calgary, and 600,000 jobs over the next 50 to 60 years, or 2 generations? People would think about what kind of city would they want their grandchildren to live in. Where will people live? Where will they work? How will they travel? And what are the implications? As part of making a political case, we identified the case for change in financial terms. By intensifying development in nodes and corridors, we save approximately 250 square kilometers in land compared to the business as usual scenarios that we were tracking on. We reduced personal and commercial vehicle kilometers traveled by 40% in the approved plan scenario. We also built support from administration within the City of Calgary and other agencies by demonstrating the financial savings to other city and provincial services. We demonstrated, for instance, that through a combination of road capital costs, transit capital, water and wastewater services, fire stations, recreation centers like schools, recreation centers like swimming pools, and schools themselves, all combined can save administratively $11 billion, a 33% difference over the business as usual scenarios. We recently began to explicitly link land use and transportation at the project level. So we moved beyond doing it at the city level in policy to actually beginning to code it into projects. We did this by planning our Green Line LRT project that Asif spoke about simultaneously in 4 layers. The first layer was the transit infrastructure, so the LRT, bus terminals, stations, and immediate station access associated with most LRT projects. In the second layer, we programmed connections to stations, streets further away from the project that enabled people to make the connections to stations and to land use opportunities nearby. The third layer was planning of transit-oriented development opportunities, offering private and public landowners the opportunity for certainty in what they could develop next to LRT stations or within a 600-meter walk of LRT stations. And finally, we programmed the city shaping opportunities, or the civic services that would support the growth of the area over time. The challenge with linking land use and transportation at the project level is resourcing. With the Green Line LRT project, we took 6 station areas to a detailed concept level. There are upwards of 50 or 100 such areas in the city of Calgary overall on other rapid transit corridors, whether they're BRT or LRT, and that makes it challenging to resource, and prioritization of what station areas are brought to this level is necessary. Another key to embedding mobility into our political and administrative systems is speaking the language of citizens, not technicians. Our 2009 long-range plan began making references to the attributes that matter to transit customers rather than by technology or mode of travel. So instead of talking about our light rail transit vehicles, bus rapid transit, regular bus, and specialized transportation, we began to talk the language of frequency, or how often a vehicle would show up, the span of service, reliability, not only of vehicles, but of facilities that people need to access the vehicles, like escalators, elevators. We talked about the comfort and convenience of the service and how central it was to the community, which mattered to people, particularly citizens, not only non-customers. Later, these led to the development of our Calgary Transit customer commitment and the associated performance monitoring. That's part of our daily work today.
And
Chris,
finally, very short interruption. We have now 1 slide yet to go, so I would just like to invite the audience to already now raise questions, and while Chris will talk on the last slide, yeah? So please feel welcome to state any questions. You may go on. Sorry, Chris.
Thank you. And finally, another key to our administrative and political support is to link to plans in different time horizons. So the Calgary Transportation Plan, Municipal Development Plan, as I mentioned, was a plan looking at 2 generations or 60 years. We translated those plans into our 30-year route ahead Calgary Transit Plan that Asif will talk more about. In turn, we translated that into 10-year infrastructure priorities, and then into a 4-year investment horizon where we looked at both operating and capital costs for our civic business plan. So as I mentioned, Asif will tell you more about our route ahead plan at the 30-year horizon, and that's a bit about how we embed mobility planning in our systems here in Calgary. Over to you, Matthias.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That was really impressive. I think particularly how you made the business case of improved land use planning, that actually directly translates into savings for the administrations. I was impressed by these figures. So we have already a number of questions, and I would like to pick some. So the first one was actually from Henry Kamau. It's actually it is a strategic question. So how are you organizing transit in Calgary? So private versus public or local government operation of mass transit systems. What is used in Calgary's, and what are some of the pros and cons between a public and private operation? And the question is in the context that Nairobi plans to particularly operate mass transit systems through private operators. So yeah.
Thank you for that question. It's Chris, and I'll attempt to answer it, and then Asif can follow up with me. Calgary is a bit unique in that we report directly to a council of 15 council members with 1 mayor. We have, outside of the city of Calgary, approximately 100 to 200,000 people in roughly 10 municipalities that are actually upwards of 5 to 20 kilometers away from Calgary. So how we've organized public transit in our region is largely public-owned and operated systems complemented by private systems in emerging areas. We deliver the public transportation within the city of Calgary through public operators. So we have, as Asif mentioned, 3,000 employees at Calgary Transit. We deliver some services like garbage collection and security through private contractors, but largely we're a public operator. Some of the emerging regional systems traveling from towns outside of Calgary into Calgary operate using a contracted service provider. So Airdrie, for instance, owns and operates the service but contracts to a private provider. I think some of the pros and cons associated with that are the subject of a long separate presentation, but I would say one of the keys to being in charge of your own workforce is the responsiveness, and that's of great value. Flexibility and responsiveness, that's of great value to the city of Calgary, but again, we report directly and we're at the beck and call of a city council at basically a local level here in Calgary. If we were to be a regional operator, we might benefit more from the larger cost savings and structured contracts and long-term service delivery associated with private sector delivery. But as I mentioned, it's the subject of a long separate webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. We have a number of really interesting questions, and I think at this moment, I will just allow one more question. And I think because that's a question that we get more and more often. So, how are you dealing with new transit modes like Uber and other mobility service providers and apps and so on? So, how do you implement these new alternatives in your strategic planning? So that question is from Kiara Shkwasimlo. Yeah.
Hi, this is Asif. That's a really interesting question that's really emerged very recently. So how do you incorporate the Ubers, the Lyfts, some of the micro transits in the world right now? What we're doing right now is actually keeping our finger on the pulse, to say. So we're looking at what's emerging throughout North America and Europe right now, and really seeing what we can incorporate in the future. So for example, traditionally in Calgary, we have low ridership in the evenings or industrial areas where there's a lot of shift work. So we're currently exploring opportunities to see where some of these microtransit, car sharing, transportation network companies could be integrated with the Calgary Transit network. We're working very closely with some North American transportation agencies such as the Canadian Urban Transit Association, just to see what sort of where we can incorporate the Ubers and Lyfts of the world. Some examples are the late night. Can we work with providers to have some sort of public-private partnership that could provide that level of service, or the industrial side of things? Van pooling, for example, could be an opportunity that we'll explore right now too. So I'd say we're looking to incorporate that over the next year into our strategic plans. But definitely exciting and a lot of opportunity to work with those companies.
Yes, thank you, Asif. There are a number of more questions would be really interesting to get into, and I think we will keep track of them later on. But now, in order to keep our agenda first, I would ask you to continue with the part on stakeholder engagement and participation. That will be overtaken by you, Asif. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Matthias. The Route Ahead project differed from past Calgary Transit strategic plans in two ways. It included a comprehensive public engagement with a multi-phased approach, and it included nearly all aspects of Calgary Transit service delivery all in one document. We asked the citizens what changes they would like to see now and in the future. The responses we received directly fed into our long-range plans to start transitioning from a downtown-focused system to a more grid-focused network, which included crosstown connections. In addition to the Route Ahead engagement, Calgary Transit receives input from other sources, including customer satisfaction surveys, non-user surveys, customer service requests through a centralized phone and web system, and from our customer advisory group. The Route Ahead project included 3 phases of engagement that paralleled 3 phases of plan development. I'll speak about these further in the next few slides. The route ahead plan was developed with a core team of 4 and at times 7 people working full-time on the project. We did contract out some work to develop promotional materials, maintain a website, and conduct online surveys. A steering committee was created that included members of council, members of administration, which include city staff, and 1 external member who was a vice president at a Canadian airline company. Phase 1 included blue sky engagement and information gathering, focusing on customer needs, the current state of Calgary Transit, and best practices of other transit agencies. The goal was to gain a clear understanding of what stakeholders want now and how they see Calgary Transit in 30 years. The Route Ahead website was used to promote a 2-way dialogue on the future of public transit in Calgary. We also introduced a planning blog and a Twitter account to promote the plan and ask for feedback. These forums were used to update citizens on upcoming events and to introduce the plan. Another tactic in this phase was the engagement bus. A 40-foot low-floor bus was refurbished to create a comfortable atmosphere for customers to share their ideas. The bus was operated on existing transit routes, picking up customers and offering them a free ride in exchange for their feedback. Customers were encouraged to write their comments on stickers and place them on the interior or exterior of the bus. In the choices phase, an interactive online budget tool was developed. The tool asked citizens how they would spend money if they were the director of Calgary Transit. Choices had to be made through operating and capital budgets in order to prioritize projects. Over 3,700 people visited the website, and over 1,000 submissions from the public were received. In phase 3, the Route Ahead team presented the results of the initial phases of engagement and developed 2 foundations for the draft plan: core principles and transparent evaluation criteria for project prioritization. The first slide is on core principles. The customer experience. Make it easy to use public transit, including understanding, accessing, waiting, paying, riding, and connecting. Transit service should be safe, accessible, clean, convenient, comfortable, and reliable. And we also wanted to address barriers for non-users. The network planning portion. Match transit with land use, which Chris discussed in the previous section. The network should also focus on investment and look at increasing ridership. And design the network from a connective grid. We should evolve the network focused on downtown to making connections across the city. The last piece is financing transit. We aim for a cost-revenue ratio of 50-50, which is 50% from the fare box and 50% from taxes. We want to meet the capital funding objectives of investing mobility, which is our 10-year transportation capital plan for Calgary. And we also want to improve of what we own. This slide is on the evaluation criteria for project prioritization. Transparent evaluation criteria were important to City Council so that they could understand exactly how capital projects were ranked. The ratings of projects using these criteria is one of the tools to assist administration and council in determining which projects to construct and when. We'll review this slide again in the next section of the webinar. The last part of phase 3 included reporting back to citizens and stakeholders on what was heard in the earlier phases of engagement and how input from citizens influenced the Route Ahead strategy. This was done through the Route Ahead website, emails and meetings with stakeholders, and further use of the engagement bus. This phase offered the public a chance to review the draft strategic plan. As a quick summary, this slide highlights 10 of the most important responses we heard from customers. Reliability and frequency emerged as the highest priorities. However, it doesn't matter if we add buses to existing routes which are still congested. Customers want more reliable service at the end of the day. This slide highlights some lessons learned from our engagement phase of Route Ahead. The core team met with over 4,000 people face-to-face. Comprehensive engagement was time-consuming but well worth the effort. The value of blue sky engagement. Route Ahead asked open-ended questions throughout the engagement process. This worked well because there were broad ideas as well as customers having an avenue to express their concerns. The challenge was to summarize all the feedback and to group the responses properly. The branding. A comprehensive communication strategy was developed to ensure a strong brand that would resonate with Calgarians. This approach successfully established Calgary Transit as an organization that is open, honest, and responsive to its customers. The engagement bus was effective in the blue sky phase, when people needed little information in order to provide feedback. However, in the check-in phase, it was more difficult for customers to read information while the bus was moving, and customers were less likely to spend time reviewing the draft plan, particularly in colder weather. The base maps. Lastly, schematic maps that showed a minimum amount of detail were appropriate for a 30-year strategic plan. This keeps the maps easy to read and understand in a short amount of time. Overall, the engagement took a lot of time and effort. However, it allowed us to build an open and transparent plan. Based on some of the conversations I've had with some listeners, I've also included the next 4 slides that could be used as a template for communication engagement for specific projects. This will need to be refined to policies and procedures in each city, country, and agency. I'll highlight some key features in red. The project objectives and approach. What is the goal of engagement, as well as looking at the schedule and adjacent projects? You really want to define the objectives and the approach. Identifying your stakeholders is always important because you want to capture all people and groups who may be affected and may want to provide input. The list underneath the title in red are just an examples of other groups that you may want to engage during your project communications and engagement plan phase.
Okay, short interruption, Asif. Yeah, again, to everybody, please feel free to place your questions on topics of participation and stakeholder engagement at this moment. Yeah. Okay, please continue. Sorry, Asif.
Thanks, Matthias. Just again in red on the slide, politicians and internal stakeholders, or internal city stakeholders. Keeping politicians informed is always important. Additionally, we want to ensure we are working with other groups within the organization to ensure there isn't any overlap. Risk is always important. Some items pop up, such as elections and funding opportunities. And 2 of the most important items in communication engagement that I've noticed over my career is the intent of engagement and reporting back to stakeholders. It's really important to be honest about why you're going out to engage with people. Are you just letting them know a project is being constructed, or are you sincerely looking for their feedback? Both are okay depending on where you are, as long as you're transparent about it. And lastly, to ensure you're transparent, make sure you keep stakeholders updated along the way of the project. This ensures there aren't too many surprises and you're able to deal with issues as they arise. Matthias, I'll hand it back over to you for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Asif. That was really impressive. I really like the practical things where people can engage directly and even receive some incentives. Yeah, so let me just have a look at the questions. They're again popping up more and more. So at the moment, I don't see yet a direct question relating to participation here in that moment. But I would be personally, if I just take the word, I would be interested if you actually have a particular budget for participation, and is that within the city, is that within Calgary Transit, or also what did it cost to you to convince the political decision makers to eventually, or your bosses to commit those budget for participation?
So this is Chris. On the Route Ahead project itself that Asif just stepped through, our overall project budget, including a lot of the technical work that we did, the final report documentation, and the engagement, was approximately $1 million. I would estimate that we spent probably half of that, $500,000 Canadian, which is approximately the same as the US dollars at the time, on all of the public engagement and outreach and communication, be it through social media, videos that we produce, advertising space on vehicles, and paper documentation, having the engagement bus out, the fuel and operating time for that. So it was significant. How we got support for it was making the case that the plan was going to be based on customer and citizen input, and that we would follow the proper principles of engagement that Asif spoke about. We did an engagement effort that might cost $100,000. Was the Blue Sky Round, where we went out and asked people where they saw the future of public transit. Another $100,000 was to take that input and go back out and ask them, what would you do if you had limited resources and had to prioritize things? And then another $100,000 was to go out and tell them what we heard, what we did with what they said, and what the results of the technical work based on that engagement was, and what it resulted in. And then another layer below that that gets us to approximately $500,000 was the engagement with stakeholders in person behind the scenes, the major stakeholders like the school boards, the province, the region outside of Calgary, private sector boards like our downtown association, business improvement zones in the community, and so on and so forth. So we had support because we did a significant amount of project planning beforehand, and because it was part of a very structured approach to the project.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, very much. I think at least one or two of the questions from the audience are additionally answered with your answer on that. Because someone asked also what is actually the borderline to engage stakeholders. So as there are so many groups mentioned, but as we understood, you were really talking with all of them to ensure that the projects receive the highest support possible. I would like to address another question from Louisa Martin to you, and the question would be here, so what did you do to try and engage with the persistent non-users of the transit system? So with the car drivers and yeah, particularly with the car drivers, I would say.
Well, I'll share the main one that we found effective was the bus itself. So not only was the bus helpful for transit customers, we offered a free ride in exchange for their views on the future of Calgary Transit, but it was visible on the streets of Calgary. And it started out as a blank slate with only our project branding on it, which said, it's your transit, tell us where you want us to go. And it was not only directed at customers, but at citizens. As Asif mentioned, half of our funding comes from tax support. And so that was not only a message to our customers, but a message to citizens who would see the bus saying, you're paying for this through your taxes. We want your input as well. So having the bus on the road and visible to so many drivers and people on sidewalks was a way of generating some awareness of it. We had a lot of support through our council members who have constituents who aren't transit customers in some cases. Twitter was emerging at the time, and it was a great way to playfully leverage some of that. We would tweet where the bus was, and that would get out to people other than our customers. And I guess finally we did some more methodical and structured statistical surveys targeting non-customers. So phone calls to random people, identifying as non-customers, and we'd ask them, what's preventing you from riding Calgary Transit? What are the ways you get around today? And we identified through that some of the obstacles and important attributes to non-customers.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's really great, and with your extensive answer, again, you have caught several other questions that popped up here, particularly how to deal with people who are not so eager to use digital media and so on. And I think you have expressively outlined that. And there was another question here from Teresa Gerber, actually. And that is rather on this institutional side. So did you have like a particular steering group with the main stakeholders? Was there kind of a board, or how did you do that from an organizational perspective?
Our main guiding body was City Council. So they, our local council had to approve the plan itself. We had a subset that hears any transportation projects. We call it the Standing Policy Committee on Transportation and Transit. So those are the elected bodies. We then, as Asif outlined in his presentation, had a steering committee created that included some members, 4 members of City Council. It included members of our administrative leadership team from both Calgary Transit, Transportation Planning, Roads, and the Planning and Development Department, so a non-transportation member. And then we had a member from private industry, a vice president from a local airline, well, a Canadian airline called WestJet, that's famous for its customer service and customer satisfaction. So that was our formal steering committee. It met monthly for 12 months through all phases of the project. I should mention we also, at the time in 2011, had just initiated a new Calgary Transit Customer Advisory Group. And that was a group established to guide Calgary Transit in its customer service and delivery day in and day out. It meets roughly 4 to 6 times a year. I mentioned it just started in 2011, and they provided a key role in guiding us in certain aspects of the project as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris. So we spent a lot of time already on this part. It was greatly interesting. So let's get back to the agenda and move over to the third key questions. And this is rather on project development. So how do you get through mobility projects from ID through all the strategic financial planning until it's like the project actually can start? So the word is yours, Asif, again.
Great. Thank you again, Matthias. The map on the right illustrates the future rapid transit network that was developed after the strategy development and public engagement. The projects are designed to address growth of the city as well as facilitate the cross-town movements. The projects are a mix of LRT, BRT, high occupancy vehicle lanes, and various transit priority measures. To determine whether we needed BRT or LRT along a corridor, we looked at existing ridership, space on the right-of-way, when it would be needed, overlap with other transportation projects, as well as the principles and criteria that were created in the engagement phase. 5 of these projects were highlighted in the first section of the webinar that we're constructing today. As this is a 30-year plan, some projects will be phased in over 30 years or more. This typically means that some projects will start as bus routes and would evolve to BRT, transit-only lanes, and eventually LRT. The short, medium, and long-term marks on the slide on the top of the colorful chart over there indicate 10, 20, and 30-year timelines for the mode progression of transit service. Investing in mobility is the City of Calgary's 10-year strategic plan for capital transportation infrastructure projects. This includes all transit, roads, and other various transportation projects. It defines the priority and timing of projects and helps council inform budget decisions. Updates typically occur when there is a change in funding or cost estimates for projects change. The projects that were identified in the rapid transit network are fed into this capital plan. Based on these priorities, investing in mobility is structured around 4 infrastructure categories: mobility hubs and transit corridors, goods movement and traffic growth, transportation network optimization, and life cycle and asset management. The percentages are guidelines and are based on infrastructure and asset management needs for the purpose of corridors. As a reminder, the Investing Mobility Plan aligns as much as possible with other departmental and corporate goals. This includes the Route Ahead Transit Plan. In the previous section, Chris had mentioned the Calgary Transportation Plan and Full Development Plan. Those are roughly around the 30 to 60-year horizon, and the Calgary Transit Route Ahead Plan, which is roughly a 30-year plan, feeds into that directly. The chart on the screen shows how transportation projects are prioritized and funded. Projects typically emerge from planning studies, council requests, citizen requests, in addition to projects that were identified in Route Ahead. Due to limited amounts of funds, the projects are then prioritized in investing in reliability. As a quick note, funds for projects in Canada come from a few sources, including the federal government, provincial government, developer levies, and fuel taxes. As a reminder from the public participation section of the webinar, evaluation criteria for project prioritization was created. Each category has 3 subcategories, and projects are scored based on points. As a side note, there are other factors to consider when prioritizing projects, such as the readiness and mode progression, the availability of capital and operating funds, Calgary Transit operational requirements, and coordination with other business units and projects. In some cases, the prioritization may list based on some of the points listed just now. To make the scoring criteria more tangible, we'll quickly step through one of the projects that was identified in Route Ahead, the airport rail connection from Northeast Calgary, which is circled in purple on the map on the top right of the screen. For context, downtown is located on the bottom left of the picture. We currently have 2 bus routes from Northeast Calgary, which is on the top right of the picture, as well as a BRT route from downtown Calgary, which is on the long red line running north and south on the picture that connect to the airport. Many cities have long discussions on how to serve airports and which technology to use. After this example, we'll open up the floor to questions. Land use is the first category, with supporting categories such as activity centers and corridors, connectivity to the greater transit network, and connections to populations and jobs. Each subcategory is scored out of 3. I would also suggest quantifying the criteria to avoid being subjective and open to interpretation. In Calgary, there were no activity centers and corridors in that area currently and in the future, so the score was a 0. The picture on the bottom left of the screen is from our city's municipal development plan and indicates regular industrial and low-density suburban developments in the future. If they're planned for higher density, there would either be a darker color or a larger circle in specific locations for development. Transit network and connectivity. There would be connection to the LRT line and a future BRT route. The purple line on the map indicates the future LRT, and the second blue line from the top indicates the future airport connection. We scored this subcategory a 2 out of 3. Lastly, for land use, we looked at future population and employment. The picture on the bottom left shows our population and employment projections for the future. As they were low now and in the future, received a score of 0. The next category is the customer experience, which included travel time advantage, reliability and delay, and increasing the passenger capacity. For travel time advantage, we gave it a 3 out of 3 due to the future planned separated right-of-way, direct routing, and increased speed of service. Reliability and delay scored a 2 because there's an average level of congestion in the projected forecast of traffic. If there was a higher level of congestion in the area in the future, a separated right-of-way would be needed sooner. The increased passenger capacity received a 3, as the rail connection would increase passenger capacity in the future compared to the existing bus service today. The last category is project characteristics, which includes serving high ridership corridors today, improves life cycle and asset management, and capital cost. The airport rail corridor today has limited ridership, which can be accommodated by bus routes. As ridership increases, more buses and higher frequency can be added before moving over to a rail-based connection. Thus, it scored a 0. Maintenance and asset management scored a 1, as there's some work that can be coordinated with other transportation projects in the area. Lastly, the capital cost of the airport rail project was quite high, thus scoring a 2. It's typically harder to secure funds for projects when there are higher capital costs. To summarize, the airport rail project scored a 13 out of 27. That's not to say the project is not a priority, but it's not a priority right now. In contrast, the projects that I described at the beginning of the webinar all scored much higher and are needed right now. And lastly, the airport rail project is still identified in route ahead as a project in the future. However, for now, we're able to serve the corridor with existing bus routes. Over time, as demand, ridership, population, and employment all grow, we're able to evolve the service to increase frequency, evolving to a BRT and ultimately an LRT connection. Having this plan in place also allows land developers to make development decisions on future plans, as well as making the case for funding requests. On that note, I'll hand it back over to Matthias for some Q&A. Hi, Matthias.
Sorry, Asif, I was talking. I just had my phone muted. So thanks very much, Asif, for your insights on project development. We had, I think it was very deep insight into the criteria of evaluating particular projects, which is highly relevant to say and to decide which projects actually should be taken up for implementation and then to arguments towards decision makers for improved funding. So yeah, everybody please feel welcome to post any questions related to project development. I think there would be a lot more to talk about at this point. So yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions here. And we have coming a few ones. And I think I will post the latest question that we have here from Stephanie Holzbart at Inhabitants. And he was like, the question is, let me try something to post that up. No, I can't post it really. I will read it. Your land use criteria looked at population and job intensity. So how do you make sure to understand origin and destination? For example, residential area on one side of the town, but industrial area on the other side. So there's a high movement. So how do you ensure that you have the data right, that you plan like for the real mobility needs, like on yeah, rather than the technical data? How do you deal with that in your at Calgary Transit?
So Calgary Transit is part of the transportation department at the City of Calgary. The City of Calgary maintains a geodemographic forecast of where we believe jobs and population will be located at different time horizons in the future. That ranges from 10, 20, 30, and even 60 years out. In turn, the Transportation Department maintains a regional transportation model. The technical tool that we use is the ME model. And so based on that population and job and geodemographic forecasting the origin and destination and trip characteristics. So we get auto and transit and walk and cycle forecasts for those time horizons in the future. We do the same at the regional level, so we also know what background travel is being generated as the region outside of Calgary grows, and those are all based on travel behavior surveys that we do here in Calgary on a rolling basis. So yeah, the one thing it doesn't necessarily capture is how emerging technologies or changes in the way people want to travel or where they want to work in the future, how those might change over time. But it does give us, with a bit of uncertainty, some basis for those future land use and travel.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for the answer on that question. The next question would be, actually, when did you all start this and how did it work out? Because you have a quite extensive BRT and also LRT system. So did the city had previous modes of transport like normal bus lines? and how did actually the reforming process from the old modes towards a more extensive mass transit system work out? And maybe, yeah, what were a little bit, what were the major challenges in terms of negotiation, setting up the first transit projects and so on? If you could elaborate a little bit on that, I think that would be very interesting, because a lot of our partners in developing countries, emerging economies, they are currently at this state where they are thinking about moving over from rather informal transit systems to like mass transit, like you have achieved it already.
Sure, we can offline point you to some books that are available that we might have better information online that goes into great detail. But the turning point for the city of Calgary was in the late 1960s or mid 1960s, on the heels of a local economic boom. The city had been operating buses in regular traffic with some bus-only lanes in tactical locations to get by bottlenecks. This is when we were a city of approximately 300 to 400,000 people, and a series of at the time very expensive reports were generated looking at the future of transit in Calgary. They were done by Simpson and Curtin, a very an esteemed consultant at the time, and that looked at how would we generate transit to support Calgary's growth into the future at the time. Also pivotal in that conversation was Calgary's decision not to build freeways next to downtown. So unlike Boston or LA, there was the decision made not to extend the expressways or freeways into the downtown. And that preserved the character of the center city and the character of the river valley next to downtown. But it did turn the whole idea of how do we get people into the downtown on its head. So it made the decision about whether to move to a bus rapid transit system or light rail transit system a critical turning point. And so it was in the late 60s, early 70s when the decision was made to move to LRT for its high capacity. And I think that's served us very well since then. The downtown has intensified significantly, and Calgary's economic growth in two economic booms since then has been supported by our transit system. It's not without its downsides, though. And as Steve mentioned, our recent plan, the Route Ahead plan, is focused a bit on the needs of Calgarians in employment areas and post-secondary institutions outside of the downtown. So our latest questions have been, how do we turn from being an auto-oriented city in those areas outside the downtown to being more transit supportive? And so that's a unique turning point that we're now in now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Chris. I think we have reached like the 1 hour time, and we had talked about that we will reserve a little bit 15 minutes more. So I would just continue, because I have a whole list of questions which are all exciting, and I would also love to experience more on that. So I think we will just switch fluently over to the question and answer round, and in about 10 minutes we will have the next 10 minutes or so for that. And afterwards I will have a look again at all of the questions, and then I will compile and also group some of the questions, and then yeah, you have previously offered to answer them also in a written form. To all participants, don't worry, I think your question won't get lost. And yeah, I will just continue. And there is one that is something that is moving more and more cities which are prone to climate change, and which experience impacts of climate and change and weather impact events. And there is one question from Andres Jacin Silva, and he's asking what kind of resilience strategies have been taken into account in transportation project planning and financing after the Calgary flood in 2013.
So we, for those who don't know, in 2013, Calgary was flooded by the combination of spring outflows from the nearby mountains and a 3-day storm that perched itself right on the river that flows into town here. So it was a unique event in Calgary's history. The river inundated the downtown, and it was the most costly natural disaster in Canada's history. We have recovered, and a big part of that was the recovery of the transportation network. Some of the resiliency was validating the approach to some of our existing approaches to transportation system management and traveler information. So it validated some of the approaches we had at the time, the ability of the City of Calgary to allocate resources and make decisions very nimbly. I mentioned before, we report to a City Council. We're part of the Transportation Department along with Roads and Transportation Planning. That enabled us, for instance, when the downtown LRT had to be shut down because our entrances to the downtown on at least 2 approaches were inundated with water, to move to quickly reserve lanes of traffic on inbound arterial streets and run buses in parallel to the LRT network on transit-only lanes. So one example was the organizational resiliency that was validated in that approach. Another is just the hardening of systems. So Asif mentioned the Green Line that was recently approved as our next major LRT construction project does include a tunnel under the downtown. That, like our other tunnels in 2015, as part of the resiliency review and the cost estimate of the project, we've included ensuring that tunnel ventilation and station entrances are going to be raised sufficiently to withstand the inundation of flooding in the future, and the hardening of systems, both on your existing tunnels and on the Green Line, will include things like waterproofing, raising pump stations, and raising the capacity of drainage and things like that. So a lot of it comes down to being able to repair and recover quickly, but some of it is on the preventative side through the design of the projects.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I had another question which is going a little bit beyond your administrative level, beyond the city level, and Henry Kamau is asking, while the line ministries are eager to implement transport improvement projects and are involved in planning, finance ministries tend to place transport low on project priorities in developing countries. So how should the finance ministry be approached for support, or how does that actually work in Canada? So do you receive support in terms of finance from the national government, or how is the dialogue on improving financial frameworks and project development frameworks?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. It's one we grapple with, but we do take for granted that we do already have great support from the federal government and provincial government. One of the keys is having a plan in place at our local level. So before you approach upper levels of government or financial bodies with a project, they need to understand how that project fits with the overall strategy that the city or a transit agency has. And that was one of the reasons why we created the Route Ahead 30-year plan, was to be able to demonstrate that each of the projects that the federal and provincial government might hear about from us on a case-by-case basis is part of a larger strategy that contributes to some of the objectives they have as well. So that's one, have a plan in place. The next is to work with other cities or other transit agencies that are also approaching those upper levels of government, not as competitors, but as a collective body that needs support. Our mayor, Mayor Naheed Nenshi, has been great, and our previous mayors have been equally supportive of working with other cities to make the case that municipalities are where people are moving, and that's where our tax money needs to go. And as opposed to road projects, transit projects support things like low-cost mobility, getting employees to work so that things that cost are expensive to create, whether it's innovation or commercial ventures or public sector services, that those services can continue to be delivered through low-cost, effective prices. A big chunk of that is people being able to travel to work for less money than it takes to drive. So making the case that a provincially funded or federally funded project enables citizens to save upwards of $10,000 a year by not having to buy a car, that creates the low-cost employee mobility that makes other federal and provincial programs successful. And we did that, as I mentioned, in concert with other municipalities and through our Canadian Urban Transit Association. So having a plan in place and then lobbying those federal and provincial financial organizations collectively, not competitively, with other agencies has proven successful in Canada.
Yeah, thank you, Asif. I think that that's really the great way to go. It's like obviously like making the business case and showing what actually other ministries will save on, and I think that's really important lessons learned. And the next question relates to that. Louisa Martin was wondering previously why you use such a large score for high capital costs, because it seems like projects with low costs or a good cost-benefit ratios should have a higher priority. So the question, are like low-cost projects or projects in the field of non-motorized transport, are they, how are they prioritized in relation to public transport?
Thanks, Matthias. That's another good question. Well, so in the beginning of the webinar, I highlighted 4 BRT routes, and when the scores came up for those, they scored much higher than the airport trail example, and that was for a number of reasons. There was already existing ridership there. BRT is a good form of implementing a higher capacity route within a particular right of way. So we're able to get higher capacity. We're able to connect people and jobs at a lower cost than, say, a rail connection. The other part I'll highlight is rail connections are quite expensive, and so what we were noticing from the airport rail example was there's already an existing bus route, existing BRT today, but to evolve over to a train was quite high. We'd also argue that there's other areas in the city of Calgary where a train would be required prior to the airport train connection. Sorry. So that's why it scored a little bit lower in that sense. That's not to say we wouldn't need it in the future. The other piece of it too is when project costs are quite high, it makes it a bit of a challenge to go and ask for that level of money, as it is a bit of a challenge to get from the province and the federal government. So that's a bit of a, there's a couple of answers in there. One is the mode progression. It could be needed in the future. And the second piece of it is there's other corridors that we can get higher capacity, higher level of service for relatively cheaper, and that's needed right now as well.
All right, and the next question is very easy. What is actually your modal split? So the trip share between public transport, motorized transport, transit, walking, and cycling.
We're at approximately 15% for trips on the average weekday citywide into the downtown. I mentioned the downtown is where we've had the turning point in the way people travel because of the parking policies, the nature of the network in the downtown. We're upwards of 45 to 50% taking transit into downtown Calgary during the average weekday.
All right, thank you very much. I think we're pretty much at the end of the webinar, and actually there are still about 40 people in the line, so you have greatly managed to keep up the high level of interest during the webinar. And a big thank you to Chris and to Asif for arranging this webinar, for spending your time on this, and for patiently answering to all the questions. yeah, as mentioned, we have many more questions, and I will then analyze them and also address them to you. So big thanks. You can't hear the applause from the audience, but I think everybody's thanking you too. And so if you could assist me in going through the presentation at the moment. So I will do a little bit the next step. Yeah. So a short tip. We have a few, as always, we have compiled a few publications from the Sustainable Urban Transport Project and also from other partners on relevant topics. So here particularly on transport demand management, on public transport, bus rapid transit, planning guides. So have a look at those documents which are linked here if you're interested for more. Could you please show the next slide? Then we have two posters, the 10 Principles for Sustainable Urban Transport. It's now available in 19 languages. So again, here, if you would like to have that in your language, please contact us. And if you're ready to assist us with translating it into your language, we will do the layout and then we will publish it in your language. And the same for the poster on the approach to road safety in Germany. We have that at the moment in 5 languages. Have a look at it if that's interesting for you. Okay, and then the next one, please, Asif. And yeah, that's something that's based where, as GIZ, Transport and Mobility, we are part of the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative, an initiative of the German Development Corporation of our ministry, BMZ, where we partnered up with a number of organizations worldwide, city association, development banks, and also knowledge associations such as GIZ, the SUTP. So have a look at those documents as well, as they outline also the vision for urban mobility worldwide, and you will also get to know more information about what we do at TUMI. Yeah, so thanks all of you. In this, we will publish the recording as well as the slides later on, as always, on the CAPSUT website. And yeah, stay tuned. At the moment, we are working on a webinar on cycling highways. We don't have a particular date yet, but as soon as there's news available, we would, of course, share it with everybody. So again, thanks for your participation, for your high interest, and particularly to you, Asif and Chris, for your excellent engagement. And yeah, I wish you a good start in the day in Canada and a good start in the night in China, and yeah, a good start in the evening in Europe and in Africa. Yeah, I forgot one thing. If you yeah, like this webinar, once you drop out of the software, the browser will show you a short survey where there are 4 questions, and I think it takes just 2 minutes to answer them. So if you have feedback for us, please don't hesitate to provide it to us. Yes, so goodbye to everybody. And I will close the line.